Hey, what's up, guys? You're now listening to Devo with Uncle Theo. Today is day 130, and we're going to cover 2 Kings, chapters 23 through 25. Last time we left off, we covered Hezekiah, we covered Abner, and now we're looking at Josiah. He's already starting off as a good king. He found the lost book, he found the law, and he's implementing everything. And remember, he was prophesied by the prophet in 1 Kings 13 that he would do all of these things and that he would set Israel straight. And we see more of that today. Let's look at verse 1. Then the king sent, and they gathered to him all the elders of Judah and of Jerusalem. The king went up to the house of the Lord, and all the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem with him, and the priests and the prophets, and all the people, both small and great. And he read in the hearing all the words of the book of the covenant, which was found in the house of the Lord. The king stood by the pillar and made a covenant before the Lord to walk after the Lord, to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes with all his heart and with all his soul, to carry out the words of this covenant that were written in this book. And all the people entered into the covenant. And that's what he does. He commands Hilkiah the high priest and the priests of the second order and the doorkeepers to bring out of the temple of the Lord all the vessels that were made for Baal and Ashtaroth and all the host of heaven, and he burned them outside. Verse 5, he did away with idolatrous priests, whom the kings of Judah had appointed to burn incense in the high places, in the cities of Judah and in the surrounding areas of Jerusalem. Also those who burn incense to Baal, to the sun and to the moon, and to the constellations, and to all the host of heaven. Verse 7, he broke down the houses of the male coat prostitutes, which were in the house of the Lord. He broke down the high places of the gates, which were at the entrance of the gate of Joshua, the governor of the city. He also defiled Tophet, which was in the valley of the son of Hinnom, that no man might make his son or daughter pass through the fire for Molech. So he does away with child sacrifice. He tears down all the high places, even ones in verse 13 that Solomon had built. Verse 19, he removes all the high places from Samaria. Verse 20, all the priests of the high places who were there, he slaughtered on the altars and burned human bones on them, then returned to Jerusalem. In verse 21 through 24, he institutes Passover, and it says, Passover had not been celebrated from the days of the judges who judged Israel, nor in all the days of the kings of Israel and of the kings of Judah. So this is powerful. He's brought the celebration of the feast that we studied a while ago of Passover. He brings that back. And this is a summary of him in verse 25. Before him there was no king like him, who turned to the Lord with all of his heart, with all of his soul, and with all of his might, according to the law of Moses, nor did any like him arise after him. But listen to this, verse 26. However, the Lord did not turn from his fierceness of his great wrath, with which his anger burned against Judah, because of all the provocations with which Manasseh had provoked him. The Lord said, I will remove Judah also from my sight, as I have removed Israel, and I will cast off Jerusalem, this city which I have chosen, and the temple of which I said, my name shall be there. So listen to this. He finds the book of the law, and he's putting all of Deuteronomy in play. He loves the Lord with all of his heart, soul, might, and strength. And this is where your mind needs to go. This is the Messiah. He's doing everything right, and he loves the Lord his God with all of his heart, soul, mind, and strength. And you should get to that point, and then you should be shocked by verse 26. However, the Lord did not turn from the fierceness of his great wrath. And that should make you say, uh-oh, hold on. So even a man who loves God perfectly with all of his heart, soul, mind, and strength is not enough. We have to find a king who can take away the wrath of God. And so this puts us in a conundrum. This puts us in a quandary. We find another additional requirement of the Messiah. He's got to be able to turn away the wrath of God. And Josiah cannot do this. He cannot reverse the curse because he cannot atone for sin. So we learn that the king, that the seed will need to atone for sin now. And that sets us up for Isaiah because Isaiah answers this question. He says that the Messiah, the suffering servant, will atone for sin. He was bruised for our iniquities. He was crushed for our transgressions. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. Isaiah knows that the Messiah, that the king, has to deal with the wrath of God. And so Josiah is the closest we ever get to this. But remember 2 Kings 23:26. Our king has to be able to abate and fully satisfy the wrath of God. But not only that, it gets worse. Josiah actually does something to make things worse. He forms an alliance to aid Babylon once again. Just like who? Just like Hezekiah, you remember? Was a good king, but he made these missteps. So he's actually not our savior. He actually facilitates the Babylonian captivity. Verse 28 says, now the rest of the acts of Josiah and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles and the kings of Judah? In his days, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up to the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates, and King Josiah went to meet him. And when Pharaoh Necho saw him and killed him at Megiddo, his servants drove his body in a chariot from Megiddo and brought him to Jerusalem and buried him in his own tomb. So Josiah is killed by Pharaoh Necho. Then it says, the people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, and anointed him and made him king in the place of his father. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. Pharaoh Necho imprisoned him at Riblah in the land, that he might not reign in Jerusalem. And he imposed on the land a fine of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. And so they prisoned Jehoahaz, and Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Joash, king in the place of Josiah his father. And he changes his name to Jehoiakim. But he took Jehoahaz away and brought him to Egypt, and he died there. So Jehoiakim gave all the silver and gold to Pharaoh, but he taxed the land in order to give the money at the command of Pharaoh. So now we see Jehoahaz, he did a lot of bad stuff. Necho, the Pharaoh at the time, imprisons him. And for the first time in Judah's history, the Davidic kingdom is toppled. The northern kingdom is long gone by now. In their kingdom, you had a changeover of dynasties over and over because they had no stability. And it showed you that only a man who served God would have stability. And you had southern kings who served God. That's why they had a sense of stability. And they only had one dynasty. Even though they had 20 kings, just like the northern kingdom, they had one dynasty, the Davidic line. But for the first time, the Davidic dynasty is coming to an end. We saw the king removed, and Eliakim, his brother, whose name is changed to Jehoiakim, is put in charge. And for the first time, you really have Egypt ruling over Judah. And that moves us, chapter 24. It starts off by saying, in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, and we know this name well, he's come on the scene and he's going to take the southern kingdom into captivity. It says, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years, and he turned and rebelled against him. And the Lord sent against him bands of Chaldeans, bands of Arameans, bands of Moabites, and bands of Ammonites. So he sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord, which he had spoken through the servants of the prophets. Surely at the command of the Lord, it came upon Judah to remove them from his sight because of the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he had done. And so after Jehoiakim, you see Jehoiachin, verse 8, was 18 years old, and he became king and reigned for 3 months in Jerusalem. But he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And it says in verse 10, at that time the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, went up to Jerusalem, and the city came under siege. And Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to the city while the servants were besieging it. In verse 14, he led away into exile all Jerusalem and all the captains and all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and the smiths. None remain except the poorest people of the land. You see that? He's taking them in waves. The cream of the crop, then the everyday people, then pretty much everybody else, the poorest of the poor. Verse 15, so he led Jehoiachin away in exile to Babylon, also the king's mother and the king's wives and his officials, and the leading man of the land he led away into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. In verse 17, then the king of Babylon made his uncle Mathaniah king in his place and changed his name to Zedekiah. And so under Jehoiakim's reign, you see everything starting to erode. And there are 3 waves in the exile under his reign. So we're going to get our first wave in 605 BC. People like the prophet Daniel is taken during that time. And so we're going to have our second wave in 597 BC. Under Jehoiachin is technically the offspring of David under the royal line, and Ezekiel is taken during that time. And in the third wave, you get Zedekiah, and that's 586 BC. And that's the final wave, and that's basically everybody. But you do need to know something. Zedekiah is not a real king. He is part of the Davidic family, but he's not part of the royal line. He's not a true king. He's not in the line of the true kings. Jehoiachin from the 597 captivity is the true king. This will be very important for a lot of reasons. How did Zedekiah get in power? It's going to be because Babylon is going to put him there, but he's out of the bloodline though. And in verse 25, now in the 9th year of his reign, on the 10th day, the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, and he and all his army against Jerusalem camped against it and built the siege wall all around it, and they completely destroyed Jerusalem. It says in verse 9, he burned the house of the Lord, the king's house, and all the horses of Jerusalem. Even every great house he burned with fire. So all the army of the Chaldeans, so Chaldeans is another word for Babylon, who were with the captain of the guard, broke down the walls around Jerusalem. And the rest of the people who were left in the city, and the deserters who had deserted the king of Babylon, and the rest of the people were carried away into exile. But the captain of the guard left some of the poorest of the land to be vine dressers and plowmen. So God destroys the whole nation. The wall is destroyed. The temple is destroyed. Well, what does that mean? Well, we know the temple is symbolic. That's where the presence of God is. So it's like Ichabod all over again during the times of Eli. God makes it look like all of this is gone. Even God is gone. And if you end the book here, it's all over. That's why you can't end the book here, because it doesn't end here. The last several verses are some of the most important verses of the whole book of the Kings. And you need to know them very, very well, is because they give us hope. They show that the line of the seed isn't done. The line of the seed isn't complete, that God is still preserving his seed, and he will accomplish his Genesis 3:15 plan and bring rest and salvation to his people. Look at 2 Kings chapter 25, verses 27 through 30. It says, it came about in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, that the king of Babylon, in the year that he became king, look at what he does. He released Jehoiachin, king of Judah, from prison, and he spoke kindly to him and set his throne above the thrones of the kings who were with him in Babylon. Jehoiachin changed his prison clothes and had his meals in the king's presence regularly all the days of his life. And for his allowance, the regular allowance was given by him, the king, a portion of each day, all the days of his life. Well, remember, Jehoiachin, he's actually the true king of Israel. What is God doing here? This king is conquered. He's in exile. He's in prison. You just let him rot away. Why is favor being shown to his king? Why is he released from prison? Why is his prison clothes taken off? Why is his head lifted up? And the king of Babylon speaks good words to him. This is important. This is the language of a treaty. You speaking good words. When Hezekiah would bring people in the house of God and give them gold, and when you use language like this, it's showing us hope. He's like, Jehoiachin, I know you are still a king. And even more, in verse 29, he has him change out of his clothes of imprisonment, and he will eat bread continually. Why is this important? I need to make sure you stay alive. Look at what God is doing here. This is beautiful. He loves his people, and he's preserving his seed and his king and his line. Because remember, this was a promise a long time ago, even starting with Abraham, and now fully charged through the Davidic covenant. God is keeping his promise because why would you make a treaty with an itty bitty nation that you've already conquered? I'll tell you why. Because you're not making a treaty with them. The heart of the king is in the hands of God, and he controls it. God is doing this. God is in control. And that should make you say, wow, this is powerful. God is sustaining the line of the kings. So who can ultimately come? The Messiah. That is amazing. That is the powerful message of the gospel. Remember, the Davidic line was hanging on a thread when the evil, wicked queen, Athaliah, was destroying the house of Judah. Jehoiada the priest hid Joash, and the Davidic line was almost lost, but not quite. And here again, it's almost lost. And the king's end with saying, not quite. God is still on the throne, and he's preserving his seed. And we'll see this time and time again because God is faithful, true to his promises. So why won't you trust him in your life, with your problems, with your trials? He is held true on the grandest stage, under the brightest lights, at the highest level. You can't tell me he won't do that for you. You guys take care and catch you next time. We wrapped up the book of Kings and we're headed to Chronicles. Hope you're still with me.